From world building to fantastic voice acting from Satala, to also seeing the beautiful POV angle shots of different scenes throughout this episode, we once again have another fantastic episode of ReZero. So there is a lot within this episode. Honestly, these past few episodes of ReZero has been so jam-packed with information, it's kind of ridiculous. And once again, we have another episode that has so much in it, in fact. We have the Great Maw Beast, we have the different witches that were introduced, we have the whole payment slash pact that, Subaru made with Ekidana, the stuff with, Rosewall at the end of the episode. We have Garfield going in and saving Subaru despite everything we saw in the previous episodes. There is just a lot to really take in. There is so much going on, and I know it definitely can feel overwhelming to a certain extent. I know when I read this in the web novel for the first time, I remember I was like, holy crap, there is just so much. There's just so much information that you're having to take in, and there's just so much you're learning, because it's like you're finally getting a lot of answers to the many questions you've had since the beginning of the story. But on top of that, though, more questions are appearing thanks to some of these questions being answered. One of the big ones is the fact that Satala and her coming out of Subaru to be able to, from what we can see, possess Amelia's body. That's a big question mark, because this means that, Satala potentially could have always have left Subaru if there was certain, things that were done in the process to allow her to break free. There's a lot of scary things to really take in and consider, and I'll talk about all this in a moment. But first, I kind of want to talk about the beginning conversation. Literally what happened right at the beginning with Subaru and Ekidana when they were talking about return by death, limitations of it, but also how Ekidana doesn't really want to know much about Satala, the Witch of Envy. As we know, Ekidana as a witch has been described as a witch that is greedy for wisdom. She wants to know all. She literally talked about this at the end of last week's episode when she finally gave a helping hand to Subaru, and it was an emotional moment for all of us watching. And, I know many were crying after that scene. She started to talk about how she wants to know everything. She is the Witch of Greed. She wants to know everything. So she's like, tell me, Subaru, tell me what you have been through. I want to hear it firsthand. I want to know the problems and stress that you go through. I want to be able to be there for you. I might not be able to go in there and do it for you, but I do want to be able to listen, be an ear for you. And it kind of satiates her, hunger for knowledge, but at the same time, she is helping Subaru out, and Subaru realizes this. And seeing her basically straight up say that even if she could understand Satala, she wouldn't want to, says a lot about how she views the Witch of Envy, but also how it kind of goes against everything that, Ekidana is as a witch, because once again, she's a witch of wisdom. She wants to kind of, know things, and her completely saying she doesn't want to know about how the mind of Satala works is a big detail. It's major, honestly, because it's like, why? I mean, it kind of makes sense, honestly, when you really think about it, Satala, the Witch of Envy, and how she has legitimately caused so much destruction and mayhem throughout the world in the past, 400 plus years. So it really makes sense why maybe, Ekidana wouldn't want to communicate with her or even know about her, but it doesn't change the fact, though. It's like she literally is able to hold back her own greed, her own desire for knowledge if it comes to Satala. That is something big, and honestly, it kind of hints at maybe some of the relationship between Ekidana and Satala and whatever happened in the past. Now, to give some more clarification to why Ekidana might not like, Satala, the Witch of Envy, we gotta remember that technically the Witch of Envy, Satala, is responsible for all the witches' deaths, and potentially the reason why Ekidana is just dead right now, why she's just a soul in this dream world. So she has definitely caused a lot, and I mean, to kind of expand upon this, to remind all of you, which was revealed at the beginning of Season 1, you remember the Witch of Envy, she was the one that kind of consumed basically half the world with just sheer darkness, her power, and eventually she was sealed off thanks to a dragon, a sage, and a knight, and that's where she's been ever since. She's technically unkillable. Now, from what we saw within this episode, she was technically able to escape out of Subaru somehow. She literally somehow broke through some form of rift or whatever, and was able to somehow possess, Amelia to be able to do what she was doing. And what we see with the shadows and the buildings, what happened to Rosewall, everything that happened towards the end of this episode, episode, it's pretty much a repeat of what happened maybe 400 years ago before she was actually stopped. So this is kind of scary, honestly, because this is kind of like what she's always been capable of, and I mean, with how powerful she is, it's like no one really can potentially stop her. But also this means that if Subaru tries to really talk about return by death, Satola could come out probably. She could probably escape and be completely free for the rest of all of time, basically. So it shows the repercussions of him even talking to Ekidana about, you know, his blessing that is return by death. But okay, let's actually talk about the limits of return by death. So right at the beginning, which was a lot of information, honestly, right at the start, it is revealed that it's very likely that return by death that Subaru uses throughout this entire story doesn't necessarily have a limit. For instance, what this meant is that he doesn't have a limited pool of lives. Like, this has been something that many have wondered for a very long time now, because Subaru technically has died a few times, but if we're going along with life pool, usually there could be like maybe 20 lives, 99 lives. He might actually have a threshold of lives that he has, and if he dies too many times, there will be truly a full-on game over for him. And in this case, it's always been a worry. Like, maybe the next time he dies, that will truly be the end. There will be no, do-overs. That's something that's always been a major concern probably in the back of his head since the very beginning, because, even though he can return, he doesn't always know if he will return. And now kind of knowing that most likely he has an infinite pool of lives as long as Satola's delusion on whatever she views Subaru as stays, he will continue to be able to use return by death, which this is a very key dialogue topic, actually, what, Ekidana said. She's like, the delusion of Satola. As long as she continues that delusion on, you, it will probably persist. You being able to come back as, you are. Which is a big question mark, because you're like, wait a minute. So, does this mean that if, the Witch of Envy wanted to, she theoretically could just straight up cut that return by death gift that he's been given, and he could potentially have a true death anytime. So, it makes you wonder this situation he's currently in right now with the Witch of Envy, and how she's going on a rampage. She potentially, since she's now technically free from her seal, she could, get rid of Subaru's return by death if she wanted to, if that, delusion no longer persists. So you can kind of see the scary nature of this, is that there is some fear here. That, the Witch of Envy is the one that gave it, and it's likely that she could easily just take it away if she so felt like it, depending on her mood and how she views things, which is very, very scary. But at this time, though, return by death does not have a limit. And there is another little detail that is dived into, which has kind of already been given to the audience for a very long time now, and Subaru himself has kind of been aware of it, but more information was dived into. And that is the fact that return by death that was given to him by the Witch of Envy does not actually, care about anyone else. It does not care about Rim. It does not care about Amelia. It does not care about Oto. It does not care about anyone in Subaru's presence. It only cares about Subaru for him to correct his mistakes, him to be able to not be trapped by a dead end that is death. Now, we gotta look at this in a different way. Subaru has always been someone that's kind of theorized and thought that it most likely is the Witch of Envy that has given him his power, given him return by death. But you gotta remember, he's never been, told that it is by the Witch of Envy, because he is technically new to this world. He was, transported to this world, and this world's very unforgiving. Nobody really likes the Witch of Envy besides, the cultist, and on top of that, who is he really going to talk to about return by death besides, Ekidana in this episode? So it makes a lot of sense. Like, he's never really got to fully 100% confirm if, the Witch of Envy actually gave him return by death, or if it was a different witch or someone else that has a lot of power. He never really knew. And now actually kind of seeing confirmation, it allows him to know who is really behind the scenes and who is the one that is gripping his heart and potentially going to stop it or hurt others around him if he, doesn't keep, his words to himself. But on top of that, though, now Subaru knows his limitations and kind of how he can use this to his advantage, but also the weaknesses to it. So basically, if he wants to be able to save everybody, he best prepare himself for a lot of death. That's kind of what the whole conversation was kind of nodding towards, is that Subaru, if you really do want to save everybody without sacrificing everyone, then you're going to probably go through a lot of torture. You're going to go through a lot of pain and suffering in your future, because there is just no way you're going to be able to save everyone in a very easy way. It's like almost impossible. And so Subaru's like, I will use this blessing. That very key word, by the way. He doesn't say curse. He doesn't say anything like that. He says, I will use this blessing to be able to do what I need to do, to be able to save people, etc. So Subaru views his return by death very differently. He doesn't view it as a full-on curse anymore. He views it as an opportunity to be able to save those around him, even if the Witch of Envy does not actually want Subaru to potentially save these others, or was not her intention in the first place. Subaru is still going to use it as a means to save others, and at the cost of potentially his own life multiple times. So it's a big detail. There is a lot of details to return by death, and most of this stuff has been common sense or very in your face since the beginning, but it's nice to see this confirmation and Subaru as a character coming to this full-on conclusion now, kind of how it works. So a little bit of weight on his head about limitations of, limited lives is no longer there, unless, Satla somehow, changes her mind. You get the point I'm getting at. But okay, I guess let's actually get into the whole conversation with the Great Maw Beast, the Great Rabbit to the White Whale, and also the Black Snake. There is 3 major name drops of that. And this is something that is going to shock many, because we all know how difficult it was for Subaru to take down the White Whale at the end of Season 1. It was a major feat. It was thanks to a lot of chance and circumstances to be able to have that end result. And even then, it was a struggle to be able to accomplish it thanks to Subaru's return by death. If it was not for Subaru's return by death and him being able to manipulate the situation to a certain point, that never would have happened. Success never would have happened. The White Whale would have claimed more victims and was able to kind of escape. That's what would have happened. But thanks to Subaru, he was able to overcome it thanks to a lot of trial and error. And it was difficult. I mean, when you really think about the capabilities of the White Whale, what it was able to do, it was able to erase people's existence itself. Like, erase it very similar to how the Archbishop of Gluttony is, of how he could eat your name and eat your very existence. That's kind of what the White Whale did. He completely erased people. So it's a very dangerous opponent that, Subaru had to face. He managed to overcome it, but obviously there was some sacrifices that were made to come to that conclusion. I mean, let's look at what happened to Crush, one of the royal candidates. She is no longer the same person. She lost all of her memories. And then you have the situation with countless other people, soldiers on the battlefield, that lost their lives thanks to that situation. It's very clear that, it was very difficult. And even with Subaru constantly resetting, there still was some problems in sacrifices as an end result. Now we gotta look at the Great Rabbit. And the Great Rabbit, you see Ekidana even mention that the Great Rabbit, in terms of size and power, it isn't as strong. However, it's infinitely more difficult to deal with because of just how it is. An example is that it's small. It doesn't really have a large brain. It actually is one consciousness, like a hive mind. But the scary part about it is that when, it dies, more replicate, it infinitely replicates itself. So basically, you would have to kill the entire rabbit army, like all of the Great Rabbit at once, to be able to completely stop it and completely kill it. So example, if Subaru was to kill, like, all of the rabbits besides one single one, they would multiply again, and so you would have the same exact problem. And you could kind of see where the issue kind of comes into play, is that, there is an endurance problem. If you're someone that's, let's say, a mage or whatever, eventually you're going to run out of magic or juice, and you're not going to be able to continue fighting a creature like this if you're not able to fully wipe it out in one fell swoop. So only very powerful mages can potentially take something like the Great Rabbit down. That is the only thing you can really see, or something very crazy in terms of power to bring this down. And there's obviously not a lot of people throughout the world that is actually kind of capable of taking down the Great Rabbit. I mean, the only one you could kind of say in the vicinity that could potentially take down this Great Rabbit right now is Roswell. But we got to factor in a lot of stuff that has been revealed within this, episode, but also just his situation. We gotta look at Roswell. He is injured. He is definitely injured, and even if he could potentially offer support to Subaru, it's very unlikely that he might be able to fully help out Subaru because of his injuries. So that is a major issue. But it doesn't just stop there. We gotta also look at another individual. We have Puck. Puck, we know, is capable of technically ending the world thanks to what he is, a great spirit and all that, and how he freezes everything. We know how strong Puck is thanks to, you know, Season 1. But we gotta remember, he's kind of been absent throughout this entire season. He hasn't really had much of a presence for probably reasons left unknown, and we'll eventually find out. But basically, he hasn't been around, and Amelia's been by herself. And so we can't really rely on Puck at this time. So Puck can't come in clutch and be able to potentially stop the Great Rabbit. So once again, it only relies on Rosewall, but because of the ending sequence of this episode, it kind of complicates the entire matter and makes many be like, is Rosewall a good guy? Is he an ally? Is he not an ally? There's so many questions, honestly, and like I said, I will talk about it in this video. But anyways, to get back on topic, the Great Rabbit is a difficult opponent. In terms of the White Well, it is definitely much harder to take down because it is driven by endless hunger. It is so hungry, it will devour anything in its sight like a plague. And you can see Subaru, when he realizes what the Great Rabbit did, he gets very sick. He kind of realizes now why there was no one around, why everything was empty, why Rosewall wasn't in his bedchambers, why all the villagers were not there. He realizes now that it's thanks to the Great Rabbit why no one was there. And he's like, holy crap, the pain I went through, everything I just went through just a minute ago is what all the villagers had to go through. Amelia and everyone had to go through that exact same thing. And you can see how his face started to get very sick. He realized he wasn't the only one that actually experienced that pain and suffering. And he obviously does not want everybody to experience that because of just how horrific it really is. So when you think about it, you know, he has a lot of pressure put on him now. It's not just dealing with Elsa. It's not dealing with the mansion and, you know, Beatrice and all of that. And Garfield, he now has the Great Rabbit. And now the complicated situation with Rosewall, with the book. There is really so much to process. So, okay. With that, though, we gotta also talk about the weaknesses of the Great Rabbit. So, when it comes to the Great Rabbit, it is revealed that it hones in on mana. So, this is a big detail. See, for a long time now, we know that Maw Beast have been attracted to Subaru thanks to the witch's scent. That this has been something that was established for a very long time. And obviously, demi-humans can also smell it as well, because of, you know, Ram and Rim, and then also now Garfield and all that. It's very apparent that, you know, demi-humans can also smell the witch's scent. But the thing is we always seen that there is Maw Beasts that have been attracted to Subaru. White Well is a perfect example of this. Subaru used that to his advantage to bring it down. But it's clear that the White Rabbit more or less targets large mana deposits, large areas of mana, to be able to focus its, you know, fighting power at. So example, it came to Sanctuary not because of Subaru's stench, but because there was a large amount of mana. The question is, what is causing this large amount of mana? Because you got to think about it. That means that for it to arrive there, someone was leaking a lot of mana. But on top of that, that means that there is a way to kind of use this against the White Rabbit. If you have a large pool of mana and you're able to actually use it and all that, you could kind of theoretically lead it away from where it's going. So example, if it's heading straight towards Sanctuary and you have it to where, let's say, someone like Rosewall was able to leave Sanctuary, maybe use like a spell or something a little bit close by it at a distance, it might completely navigate around Sanctuary and go somewhere completely else. That is a big detail that was revealed. You could theoretically kind of navigate the White Rabbit to somewhere completely else. So you don't necessarily need to defeat it. But however, Subaru did make a major move. He did say to, you know, the Witch of Gluttony that I will bring down the White Rabbit. I will end it. It's been tormenting the people for over 400 years. Enough is enough. So he kind of made a declaration that he would end it for once and for all. He wouldn't just try to run from it. He wants to actually get rid of it. So it does complicate the situation. So yeah, it's interesting, honestly. The weakness of the, you know, the White Rabbit, it's not going to be easy, obviously, when you just look at everything, but at the same time, you know, Subaru potentially can do it because, you know, Return by Death obviously doesn't have a limitation anymore. We now know that for a fact. Let's talk about the witches. So this is one of the biggest moments of the episode. I think many are going to be like, whoa! We got to meet the Witch of Pride, we got to meet the Witch of Gluttony, and we got to meet the Witch of Wrath. It's pretty big. That's a lot of detail right there. Because, like, I know many coming into this season did not expect to probably even encounter something like, let's say, Satala appearing in this episode, but also even finding out more information through the Witch of Greed. But now seeing other witches pop up, it's coming as a shock. You're like, holy crap, there's just so much world building here, because now you're kind of seeing how these witches were before their inevitable death, thanks to what Satala did over 400 years ago. So we know now kind of some of their personality traits, so I kind of want to go over each individual one and kind of explain what was going on. So first, let's get into the Witch of Pride. The Witch of Pride, at first glance, we could see that she looks like a child. In Subaru's first encounter with her, he didn't really know how to react. He didn't know exactly if this really was the Witch of Pride or the Witch of Gluttony, because he was under the impression that Ekidana was going to transport him to, the Witch of Gluttony. So upon first meeting, the Witch of Pride, he started acting a little bit different. He tried to stay a little bit distant. He didn't want to really have a contact with her, but at the same time, because of how she was in her childlike nature, he dropped his guard and he decided to shake her hand. And then she ripped off his arm. And then he comes to find out that, she is definitely not the Witch of Gluttony. It's something else entirely. And then, it led him over to the Witch of Wrath, Minerva, and, we know the rest. But the point is that at first glance, the Witch of Pride, she has this childlike innocence. It's very complicated, because when you see how she looks at Subaru, she's like, you're definitely not a sinner. She's trying to judge people. So she's kind of like a judge and executioner. That is kind of how you view this witch. She is someone that looks to see if you're an evil person or a good person. And upon shaking Subaru's hand and ripping off his arm, she realized that Subaru definitely was not a bad person, and because he did not feel any pain, but on top of that, he just didn't react too much. She was able to determine what type of person he was. But then, as he was starting to scream at her, like, give it back, because he wanted his arm back, he shattered into a lot of pieces. And then she remarked, saying, you're truly a really good person. You feel guilty. You think you're a sinner, but in reality, you're actually a good person. You got a good heart. And so, what this basically represents is that Subaru, theoretically, he got ripped in pieces because of his own guilty conscience. Subaru feels like he is a bad person. He feels like he's not good at all. He's a sinner. And obviously, the Witch of Pride, she was like, okay, you will be judged since you think you're guilty. But even then, because of that, you're obviously not guilty. You're actually a good person. It kind of shows the viewpoint on Subaru's mindset, how he views himself. He truly feels like he's disgusting and he is an awful individual and he is a sinner. That is definitely how he views himself. I mean, this is kind of indicated at the end of season 1, how he started to realize that he was useless, he was weak, etc. This has been a big part of his character since, his conversation with Rim at the end of season 1. So we know how Subaru views himself, but this is more confirmation of how Subaru views himself. His own mind views himself. He's shattered into pieces. That's kind of like his ego, his mind breaking right there. But then you see Minerva rush in and start to punch him, which corrects and fixes Subaru. So let's get into that. Now, obviously, I think many are going to probably like the Witch of, Wrath a lot more than all the other witches, if we're not counting, Ekidana, because she's like an angry healer. That's exactly what she is. She literally rushed in to heal Subaru, but she was so angry because of it, which is hilarious, honestly. It's a very interesting twist on the whole wrath sin, like the sin of wrath. But when you think about wrath, it's always anger and all that uncontrollable rage. But when you see Minerva, her rage is not because of her just being angry. She's just angry at people getting hurt. In this case, she was very upset that Subaru was hurt, so she rushed in to be able to fix him, and she put him back together. This kind of shows a little bit about, her power. She is someone that is technically a healer, and that she would go on probably rampages, healing anyone that was injured in her eyes. So, kind of let's theorycraft a little bit. So, when you think about her, personality, you can kind of see why she was potentially called a witch. Because if she was to see a battle, like a battle between two different armies, and she saw both sides getting injured, she's most likely an individual that would interrupt a battlefield between two armies and heal everyone, which effectively results in the battlefield ending in a stalemate. And you could kind of see where this could lead into a lot of issues. It seems like she's someone that doesn't really care if you're a good guy or a bad guy. She's willing to just straight up kill you because she just does not like to see people injured. It kind of dives in a little bit into her personality a little bit, and she's a fascinating character, and you can kind of see why she's called a witch, just because of that personality alone. And then, like I said, which I forgot to mention, when it comes to the Witch of Pride, you can kind of see why she's called a witch as well, because of just how dangerous she is. She's the one that kind of like judges people for sinners or not sinners and shatters them. It's pretty scary stuff. So let's move over into the last one, which is Gluttony. You know, Daphne. So Gluttony, as a witch, I think is going to come off as one of the most scary and creepy witches out of all the witches we've seen thus far, besides obviously Satala, for obvious reasons, because the Witch of Gluttony, she gives off this appearance of, once again, like she's a child, very similar to how the Witch of Pride is, but she doesn't have that personality of a child. She more has it of a ravenous beast. Like, she is a beast that is just endlessly hungry, and at any given moment, depending on how she feels, she will devour anything in her sight. Thus is what she was saying to Subaru made it even scarier when she's like, ooh, you smell good. This is toxic, but you smell good. And just the way the entire, like, coffin that she was in was shaking is even more scary, because it's just like you don't know what she's going to do in any given second. She's very reminiscent of what you would think a witch actually is, you know, in horror stories, of how a witch might, you know, lure children or whatever into a forest and devour them and all that. That's kind of what you view the Witch of Gluttony as. She is a very creepy entity. And seeing how she was just talking about food and gluttony and all that, and her viewpoint on making the three great mob beasts, you know, it makes a lot of sense. She has a good argument, but it's just like, it shows how creepy she is. So let's get into that. She starts to talk about the three great mob beasts, and she made them not because she's evil, but because she wanted to be able to feed people, which, honestly, when you really think about it, she never had ill intentions. It's very clear by, you know, her reaction and how she made these three great mob beasts, that she wasn't intentionally trying to hurt people for over 400 years. She does come up with a very good argument. She's like, look, when you look at the White Well, it's so big, it's huge. You'll be able to have a lot of food to eat. If people are able to bring it down, they can definitely eat for a very long time, which makes a lot of sense. It's a huge bounty of food. And then she starts talking about the White Rabbit, and how the White Rabbit, you know, infinitely multiplies, which theoretically, if you're able to somehow contain it, you would technically be able to have an infinite source of food. And so she's like, here you go, I kind of solved hunger here. You know, it's like you have an infinite source of food as long as you're able to bring it down. Now, we don't really know, obviously, much information about the Black Serpent, which eventually, it's very apparent we're going to find out, but that was left, you know, I guess, in the unknown. We don't really know what that creature is and what it's actually capable of. But the big point of discussion is the White Rabbit, and the fact is that she's like, don't you think it's kind of messed up that you want to be able to hunt things and eat things, but you don't expect things to eat you back? Isn't it kind of wrong and unfair? It's like, everything needs to eat. Everything needs to survive in this world. You need to eat to survive. And she's starting to talk like, look, the White Rabbit is at the point of starvation. It wants to eat. It wants to not die, necessarily. So, it's hungry. So, you guys coming in, or anyone coming in thinking that they could just take something without the fear of being eaten as well, it's very foolish. So, she was kind of, you know, keying in on the fact that if you're willing to be a hunter, you should also expect to be the hunted as well. It's a very common topic of discussion in different stories, so it's nothing relatively new, but she does have a very good point. It's like, it needs to live as well. Even though you do not like what the White Well was doing, and you don't like what the Great Rabbit is doing, at the end of the day, it is a living creature trying to survive. It's trying to eat and survive and do its own thing. So, you trying to take it down, it makes a lot of sense why it would defend itself, why it wants to eat as well. It needs to eat just as much as you need to eat. It's, interesting stuff. It's very interesting information about how Daphne created these creatures. She created it as a source of food, but she at the same time made it to where you would have to actually work for it. You can't just have a free meal. You do need to fight for it to be able to actually satisfy your hunger. And she has a very good point. She's like, people really underestimate gluttony. Gluttony is a very powerful and horrible sin, honestly, because people think, oh, gluttony, you just can keep eating, but gluttony in general is something about it's hunted in the, like hunting and the hunted constantly going back and forth. But okay, Anyways, I guess let's talk about the situation with Subaru's declaration to her, which kind of ends that topic, and he's like, I will definitely end all of your 3 great Maw Beast Mama-chan. Like, he's basically saying they will be over. And then you saw how she started to smile, and her entire, like, Iron Maiden coffin started to shake very violently, and it left a very eerie feeling, because she was like, oh, if you think a normal human can be able to take them down, then, you know, you're very mistaken. But she's like, I'm kind of looking forward to it. It's very fascinating. The way she kind of views that, she's like, it's interesting. She, you know, this man just came up to me and declared, like, oh, I took down one of your beasts already, and I'll take down the others. It's like, ooh, okay, this is fascinating. It makes you wonder why she did that. Is it because she's probably like, he might be worth eating or something? Because, like, it's a good meal being able to fight for his survival, and she's like, I should bring him down, too. It's kind of, like, it makes you wonder if that's what she's viewing when she was shaking violently like that. This next part I want to talk about when it comes to the Witch of Gluttony is something that was actually removed from the episode, but also from the light novel. So before you start thinking, oh no, they're starting to cut things, that is not the case. To kind of explain, there is a difference between the web novel, the light novel, and the anime. There's a big difference. See, the web novel came first, and it was more of a lot of information type novel, while the light novel is a more condensed and cohesive story of Re:Zero. It's a condensed version of the web novel that kind of flows better. And then you have the anime, which is taking its content from the light novel. So there is some things that happen within this moments of the web novel that obviously were not added in the light novel and then, you know, added in the anime. And I kind of want to talk about it because it's apparently not going to actually be presented within Re:Zero, at least in the anime and the light novel. So I'm here to kind of talk about. Now, they might add it in, maybe at a later date they might go out of their way, maybe add it in as an additional web novel scene or something. They might want to take from the web novel to add it in, who really knows. But at this time, apparently what I'm about to talk about was actually cut from the light novel and cut from the anime. So I want to talk about it. So here we go. So when Subaru encountered the Witch of Gluttony for the first time in the web novel, he actually managed to get a peek at her eye. Her eye viewed upon Subaru, and she viewed him, and he viewed her. And in a fraction of a second, Subaru devoured his entire arm and started to lick his own blood from leaking from his own body. This basically lets you know what the Witch of Gluttony is capable of. She, upon looking upon you, fills you with endless hunger. You know, you are driven mad by hunger itself. And basically, in the web novel, Subaru literally devoured his entire arm instantly. And he was only able to really come back together in his mind thanks to Minerva jumping in and starting to punch him to be able to fix his arm once again. Once again, this content was removed from the light novel and now the anime. And the reason for it, because you're probably wondering why would the writer do this, is because you technically already have an arm missing scene within this episode and in the content of the light novel. You gotta think about the Witch of Pride. She literally shook hands with Subaru and ripped off his entire arm, which was technically a very similar scene to what happened to Subaru with Gluttony when he ate his entire arm. So obviously the writer did not want to repeat himself of Subaru losing an arm back to back. You know, that was definitely the point and the reason of the change. It's because it would feel very repetitive and it would feel the exact same, like it's trying to emphasize a point, like, okay, these witches can do so-and-so, but obviously this change allows you to have different viewpoints on each individual witch. You have this, you know, I guess, feeling that, oh crap, you know, this child you can't understand, she's scary, she'll judge you. Then you have the Witch of Gluttony that has this endless hunger, but she's very creepy, and it's very apparent you do not want her to lay her hands on you, and you don't want to lay hands on her because she'll probably end you in a second. So the vibes that the web novel and light novel have, they're very different. I actually prefer the light novel and anime's version of it because it gets the point across in a better way. It's a more thought out approach than just straight up showing you Subaru devouring his entire arm. The reason why I'm talking about this is to kind of dive into a little bit of Gluttony's power and why Ekidana herself said do not lay your hands on her, but also on top of that, why, you know, you should not look at her, make eye contact, because if you view her, you know, yeah, done. So, that's the point. I just wanted to make sure I clarified that, because I think some might be confused to why Ekidana said that, but you didn't really get to see anything that happened within this episode. But okay, let's get in to Ekidana. So, we finally return to Ekidana after all of that, and it's fascinating the comment that Subaru makes. He says, like, after everything I just went through, you're the most normal. It's like meeting a family member once again. And this is an interesting little comment from him. It basically shows how Subaru views Ekidana. He no longer views her as a creepy witch. He kind of views her kind of like a family member, maybe like a sister or whatever. He views her in a very different way. And this says a lot about how much Ekidana has grown on him. And it makes a lot of sense, honestly, when you just think about everything that's happened within this episode, the previous episode, everything. Subaru's in for a lot. And being able to talk about everything that he's had on his chest and shoulders for a very long time, for the first time since he's arrived in this world, definitely matters a lot to him. And you can even see with him desperately asking, no matter what I have to give up, you know, as payment, I want it to be able to remember you. It's kind of showing that Subaru really does have a bond with her, and he wants to be able to remember her because he wants to be able to know that someone knows about his pain and suffering. It matters a lot to him. And him being able to just straight up say to Ekidana like it's like meeting an old family member, it says enough about how he views her, which is very concerning to a certain extent, because I want to remind everybody, despite everything we've seen in this episode and at the end of the previous episode, Ekidana can't be fully trusted. She is a witch at the end of the day. And she even makes a comment within this episode, like, don't underestimate me as being a witch. Because Subaru's like, you're the most normal out of all the witches I've seen. And she's like, oh, don't underestimate me. She's obviously poking fun, but it's also very scary, too. Because we know she can be manipulative. And she obviously has interest in Subaru because of just how different he is. And since she is the witch of, you know, greed, she wants knowledge. It makes sense why she's interested in Subaru. But it does not change the fact, though, that she is a witch. And you should not fully trust someone like that. And Subaru showing so much compassion and connection to her like he did within this episode is very scary, because if she wanted to, she could do something very awful to him for the, you know, what he could give her in payment. And she kind of started to already mess with some of the things that he holds very dear in his life. And I will talk about that in a second with the whole, you know, the wrapping around Subaru's arm. But the point is that Subaru treats her like family. He no longer is treating her like, you know, a distant stranger or a bad, evil person. He treats her with kindness. He's very blunt and honest with her, which is very strange. He doesn't treat anyone like that. Since coming into this story, like since being in this world actually, Subaru has never really been openly honest to anyone in this world. He has slightly hinted at some of his honesty, especially with Rim, when he revealed his personality, but overall, he never actually has been fully open about everything, and Ekidana is obviously the only person that he's been able to do that with, which makes sense why he acts like he does. But the point is that he has an open conversation. He's like an open book with her, and he says how he truly feels to her. He's not really sugarcoating anything. He's not hiding anything. He's being honest to Ekidana, and it's kind of scary, honestly. She got what she wanted finally. She's getting all the information she kind of wants out of him, because now he's just willing to talk about it because he kind of, you know, he trusts her at this point. So that's big detail. Big detail, and I wonder how many actually caught how Subaru was treating her throughout the episode. He was definitely treating her in a very kinder fashion because of everything. Now, let's get into the actual promise and, like, you know, how he, you know, had payment for being able to remember her when he actually leaves that dream-like, you know, world he was in. He's like, I don't care what it is, I need a payment, I want to be able to, you know, remember you. And so Ekidana's like, I'll take this as payment. She points at the wrapping around Subaru's arm. And as a reminder, this is what Petra gave him at the beginning of this season. Around episode 2, to be exact, of ReZero, Petra gave Subaru that wrapping around his arm. And it was kind of like a bond between them, showing that Petra loves Subaru, trying to protect him. Like, she wants him to have, you know, like, I guess, safe travels, but on top of that, wants him to just always be, you know, in good luck and health. And it kind of shows that Petra really loves him. And in this case, when you see Ekidana wants that as payment, she's like, obviously the person that gave you this really loves you. They care deeply about you, and they want you to be safe. And she's like, I'll take that as payment. And Subaru's like, wait, what? Like, how? And obviously, you know, she can't take the physical form of it, but she can take the connection. She can take, like, what it actually means or where it came from Subaru. Now, to explain, she obviously has been shown to be able to manipulate the mind. She has definitely allowed Subaru to not be able to remember anything about Ekidana since he went there for the first time for her first tea party. So she is able to manipulate the mind to a certain extent. And in this case, it makes you wonder, okay, if she's able to do this, this means that she obviously did something of how he views that wrapping around his arm. And it's very obvious, and it's indicated when he kind of appears from that dream with Ekidana, that he's like, I'll be counting on you, and he looks at, the wrapping, which basically shows that he no longer thinks that maybe Petra gave it to him. He probably views it maybe as Ekidana is the one that really gave it to him, and so every time he looks at that now, he views Ekidana. He doesn't view Petra. So that's what Ekidana actually meant. She's like, I'm meddling a little bit. I don't want to, ruin the person's thoughts and feelings of how they feel about you, but I'm meddling a little bit to make you, instead of remembering Petra as the one that gave you this, I am the one that gave you this. It's kind of the impression you get. It could be something else. She might have did something even more evil. She might have messed with the overall bond that Subaru has with Petra. Maybe he doesn't even know about her anymore or care about her. But it still doesn't change the point that, Ekidana did something, and it's definitely something to do with the bond that he had with Petra, and most likely anytime Subaru views that, he's just going to think of, Ekidana instead of Petra. So, that's another reason why I said that she's scary. She definitely does things that can be very manipulative, and you shouldn't fully trust her, because, once again, she is a witch. So, what else is there to get into? I guess let's talk about Rosewall, because I think that is something that many are going to want me to talk about, and I guess it's best to save the best for last. So, I think it's kind of obvious at this point. Maybe I'm wrong, but, at this point, I think it was kind of obvious that Rosewall was definitely hiding something for a while now, and seeing the book at the end of the episode after the ending credit scene probably didn't come as much of a surprise. Especially after all the dialogue we got in the previous episode. How he said that there's 2 copies of the Book of Wisdom, like replicas, and then how all the others are actually defective. And it was very apparent when he was talking about Beatrice, she had, one of the replicas of the Book of Wisdom. And then you actually have, what we see in this episode. He's holding another book in a very similar fashion to how Beatrice held her book. It's very similar. It's literally right on the money in terms of the exact same stance. He held his book with such passion, such care, such love. That was very similar to Beatrice when she held her book. So it kind of lets you know that most likely this isn't a witch's cultist book. It isn't the book that maybe, Sloth had at the end of season 1, but this is actually one of the replicas of the Book of Wisdom. So it makes you wonder, okay, so he has a book. Which means now this explains a lot of Rosewall's actions throughout the story. Why he's acted like he has. Why he seems to know things that he obviously shouldn't. Everything starts to make a lot of sense. Like, let's look at this, okay? He starts to talk about, at the end, he does a whole monologue. He's like, if you want to walk into hell, then I'll gladly walk into hell with you. But if you want to stay in it, then I will definitely be there with you on your journey. Like, he said it like that. I know I didn't quite quote everything he said, but he was pretty much saying that he was willing to do anything if it meant following whatever. It doesn't matter. He's willing to follow what Subaru potentially does, or even what the book does. He's willing to follow it no matter what it says. He's willing to change his viewpoint no matter what it is, how awful it is. He's willing to do something. And he does hint with his final line that he knows about Subaru's return by death. He's like, try not to make a mistake next time. So this does imply that he knows. He knows about return by death, which also makes you wonder, does this mean that Beatrice also knows about return by death? And this could explain their interactions with him throughout the entirety of season 1 and even season 2. And it makes you view the entire conversation that Subaru had with Rosewall many episodes ago, the first conversation, very differently now. The reason why Rosewall was so confident, the reason why Rosewall felt like he knew the outcome of what Subaru was going to accomplish because of everything with the White Well and all that, was because it was potentially in his book. The book told him what was going to happen, so he's like, I already knew what was going to happen, and that's why we're partners in crime. I know what you're doing, and I know that you're using return by death, and because of that, I allowed you to do it. I followed this book to allow you to do so-and-so. And so it kind of explains now Rosewall's mentality, why he's been absent for a very long time, and why he doesn't play much of a crucial role, is because of he's probably following the book and what it says. So it starts to make you wonder, okay, does this mean that Rosewall, everything he's done up to this point, does he follow the book, or does he actually have his own free will? It's a very similar topic as how people view Beatrice right now, and how she might be a slave to the book that she was given, or she might actually be doing her own thing. And is Roswaal doing the exact same thing? Is he a slave to it, or is he doing his own thing and sometimes he wishes to follow it? There is so many questions, and I think that really brings up a lot of food for thought, because you're just like, okay, so he's not necessarily evil, but at the same time, is he necessarily on Subaru's side? Because he's obviously knows things, he's doing things, and the question is like, if he does know things, why is he being more helpful? There is a lot of that you could wonder, and so I think it's pretty cool, the little reveal they did at the end, and I think many are going to be shocked when I reveal this. Apparently in a Isekai Quartet, well, not apparently, I know because I watched it, in a Isekai Quartet, you actually see a scene where Roswaal is holding a black book, and it's obviously indication to the book that Roswaal held at the end of this episode. So for a very long time now, you have it to where Isekai Quartet has been throwing hints at some secrets to ReZero, to the whole book that Roswaal has, to the whole what do bunnies eat. You know, there is constant little Easter eggs that have been thrown in to the little ReZero segments of Isekai Quartet. And it's just cool to see that, you know, that black book that Roswaal has been around for a while, and, you know, it's obvious what it does, because, I mean, when he actually opened the book and he showed Season 2 is coming and all that at the end of Isekai Quartet, you know, Season 1, it kind of hints at what the properties of the book is. It's able to tell the future, and we found out, we know now that the books tell the future, and obviously that book does something very similar. So just a lot of cool stuff. I think that this is a fantastic episode. So much information. I know people are going to be overwhelmed, but just remember, though, that it is worth it in the end. The world building is amazing, and I think many are just really seeing now the true quality of what ReZero has to offer. But I want to leave it at that. I love you guys. You have a wonderful day or night wherever you live. If you enjoy my content, you know, please subscribe. If you like this video, please leave a like. And with that, Chibi out.